We kept the snow away from you for a couple of days.
I'm going to Calgary tomorrow, so that's not going to
Oh.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. I would like to thank all of you for your patience and for being so accommodating as well over the last while. We will now proceed with the event. And I realize I also have the unenviable task of offering some opening comments while the people you actually want to hear from are just to my left. So rest assured, I will not take up too much of your time. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples in the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are so delighted to have so many of you here tonight. The last time we hosted an event with Ken Dryden, it was entirely online via Zoom, so it is absolutely wonderful to have him in the flesh to celebrate the launch of his new book, The Class, a memoir of a place, a time, and us. We're very grateful to McClelland Stewart for helping to make this event a reality, and of course, for publishing the book in the first place. Just a few quick notes before we begin. There will be a conversation that will take place just to my left, and that will be followed by an opportunity for you in the audience to ask questions. If you are physically here, please just put up your hand and I'll run over to you with this wireless microphone, which is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that those people watching at home can properly hear you. If you are one of those people who happens to be watching live on YouTube right now, please just feel free to write any questions you might have in the chat, and we will put them to the author as time permits. Now, we've had the pleasure of hosting Ken here for a number of events in the past, so it feels particularly wonderful to have him back officially for this. This book, in a way, is a culmination of many of his books, moving from his earliest writings from In School, Our Kids, Our Teachers, Our Classrooms, Becoming Canada, Finding a Way, and all the books that he has written on both hockey, concussions, and the reality of what it is to live and be in Canada. Your host for this evening, Paul Samyn, has been part of the Free Press newsroom for more than a quarter century, working his way up after starting as a rookie reporter in 1988. And if you count the time he spent delivering the newspaper as a boy growing up in St. James, his connection to the Free Press goes back even further. As a reporter, Paul wrote for every section of the paper, covered elections, wars overseas, and the funerals of a royal princess and prime minister. The graduate of the University of Winnipeg and Red River College helped lead the Free Press's political coverage for over a decade as its Ottawa bureau chief before being named city editor in 2007. In the summer of 2012, Paul was promoted to editor, becoming only the 15th person to hold that office since the Free Press began publishing in 1872. Some of you may have heard of our special guest this evening, Ken Dryden. He was one of those 35 of students who entered a school in Etobicoke Collegiate on Tuesday, September 6, 1960, the day after Labor Day. He also happened to be a goalie for the Montreal Canadiens in the 1970s, during which time the team won 6 Stanley Cups. He also played for Team Canada in the 1972 Summit Series. He has been inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame and the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. He is a former federal member of Parliament and cabinet minister, and is the author of 6 books, including The Game, Home Game with Roy McGregor, and Game Change. He and his wife, Linda, live in Toronto and have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and he is here with us tonight. Please give a very warm welcome to Paul.
You know, it's kind of like standing room only at the Montreal Forum.
It's nice.
That's right. We're going to start talking about the class, but we're not going to go to Etobicoke first. We're going to go to Strathmillan School in St. James. Okay, I'm in grade 3. Okay, you are my childhood hero. Okay. And Jimmy Francis will not trade me a rookie card. I have never forgotten about Jimmy Francis. Okay? I've never forgiven him. Okay? But at no point did I think I should go back and retrace what was going on in Mrs. Hickey's class. Okay? You did. And when you were explaining why you wanted to do that, you were looking for coherence. Did you find it?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
But it was finding it. I didn't start with coherence. And it's only after conversations with almost all of those 35 or family members of those who were deceased that I came to feel as if, one, I was never really going to know people's stories. I mean, that we all tell versions of our story. We may even think that it's really the only version. But then of course you discover it when, in a book like this, where we were together for 5 years because Ontario had grade 13 at the time. And basically every day for 200 days a year. And yet what we remember is different. What we remember that's the same, we may remember differently. And we come to have our take on things. And that I think that really what all of us are looking for is a coherence to our own story, is that all of those things that have happened to us, good, bad, the twists and turns, the things that seem to make no sense, is to find a sense in them. And then I think it goes one step beyond that, is that I think that we're looking for a story in ourselves that we can live with. Because ultimately, I mean, we get to a certain age and we have the story that is us. And none of us are very good at living a life that is filled with regret, focused on regret. And so I think in many ways, we just kind of come to grips with ourselves and what it is we've done over a period of time. And I wouldn't have put things that way or understood things that way at the beginning of this. But I think, but as I write and towards the end of the book, I think that's really what we do.
Okay. This book means that all the effort we put into signing yearbooks, like that high school yearbook, put us to shame.
Yeah.
Right. I want to go to page 132. I'm going to read a section here. You're talking about the brain class, okay? And you're saying, was it perhaps a life-changing, and you said maybe it failed in that regard, but, and this is the but maybe the brain class is seen more clearly another way. When we learned what we learned in class and learned from each other didn't turn out to be the making of us, but it offered solid and fertile ground for what was ahead. I arrived at ECI learning, loving to learn, and I left loving to learn. I left wanting to learn more, open to learning more, and feeling ready and able to learn more. I think to a degree that was my experience, not just at Strathmillan and the schools I was experiencing. But isn't that what we want for all kids in school? And to a degree, you've spent a lot of time thinking about schools and education. Is that something that we still have in the way that you had it at Etobicoke?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the student and their experience with learning. I guess I had two writing experiences where I had to come to grips with this. One was writing about in school, and the other was a book I did called Moved and Shaken, which was, I wanted to write a biography of somebody who others would describe as an average guy. So 40 years old, married, had at least one kid, earned an average income, lived in the suburb of a big city, that sort of had and had a high school education. And one of the things that was interesting about him is that he did graduate from high school, but it took him 2 extra years. And he left high school with a feeling that he couldn't learn. And because learning to him had to do with book learning, and it had to do with the grades that he got, and the fact that he took 2 extra years in high school and all of that, it meant to him that he really was a poor learner. So then he moves on, and where I met up with him, and he was working for Imperial Oil as a credit card collector. and he was good at his job. And every so often, he was good enough at his job that he would get offered promotions, and that he was sort of interested, and then until he found out that promotions meant taking extra courses. It meant having books that looked like school books. And both of those things to him meant, that's not me. I'm a terrible learner. I can't learn. I'll never be able to learn this. So he never took those courses. So he continued as a credit card collector and was very good at it. But he had an understanding of himself that had come from, in part from school and part from other experiences in his life, that he was not a good learner, and that he didn't want to put himself into positions where he needed to learn again because it had been so hard to learn in the first place, and that he wasn't at all sure that he would be able to learn again in the future. And then when I did the book in school, I had, it was that kind of experience multiplied many times with the number of students who were in the classroom. And that, the way I came to express it was just that, is that we do kind of write our own stories, our own understandings of ourselves. And it's so important that we have the right understandings and not the wrong understandings, because if we've got the wrong ones, we get stuck in the wrong ones, and they're so hard to get out of. And in that particular year, I followed each of the grades for a certain period of time, but for the second half of the year, it was the grade 10s. And I wanted the grade 10s because I wanted kids that were old enough that you could imagine what their futures were, and young enough that you could imagine how their futures could be different. And seeing them there, and of how, that you'd ask a kid about, math, and he'd say, I can't do math. I hate math. I've always hated math. I'm never any good at it. I'm never going to be any good at it. I don't know why I have to take math. And because I'm never going to use math in my life, I'm never going to have a job that requires math. Well, if you're a teacher, good luck. I mean, and the only chance you have, I think, is that you, as a teacher, spending the extra time, if you can find it, of helping that kid write a new story about himself or herself, and of where, okay, you got 58 in this test, and here's one here where you got 2 out of 5 on it. So you got the wrong answer, but look, let's go through it. That this is algebra. You've got X's and Y's, you've got knowns and unknowns. You're fine here. You were dealing with unknowns, okay? Then you went off the rails on this one, then everything went off the rails. But you were willing to deal with the unknowns that are X's and Y's and applying the knowns of the 2's and the 3's, and you were getting somewhere with it. You made a mistake there. It didn't turn out, but don't believe you don't have a math mind. You showed that you did by doing this and doing that. Now, without that, chances are that kid would never have any reason to believe that there was an alternative story that might be his, that might change things. And so, all of that kind of stuff is critical. And it's all present in our high school, class. You've got some people that had certain understandings of themselves that were constructive ones, and others that really were going to do them in at some point. You see?
So we're in the green room here at McNally's. John, it's a green room, right? It's a storage room.
Yeah, it's a mess.
And we are talking a little bit about hockey. I am wearing my I Love Hockey socks tonight. I'm sure that shows on the camera. The book reminds us of a couple of things. You spent time in Winnipeg here with the national team in 1970, which meant you would have played at the Dutton Arena at Ravenscourt. I've been there, done that, okay. The Manitoba roots include the birthplace of his father, Domain. Now, I know you took the Stanley Cup to Domain, but have you ever skated the Domain Arena?
I have not.
It's one for me. He gets the Stanley Cups, I get the skates and Domain. So I'm mentioning the sport component part here, because as much as the brain class obviously had some gifted kids on the academic side, on the athletic side, it wasn't just a future Hockey Hall of Famer, it was also Wayne Yetman who ran at the Olympics. And if you had stayed with the national team, perhaps you would have been at Sapporo, so there were 2 Olympians. I don't think there's another Canadian high school class of 35 that managed to put 2 people at that level of sport. And so my question about that is, was there something in that milieu that allowed you and to have not just success academically, but athletically, and not just you, Wayne, because to get to the Olympics, that's hard to do too. So can you just talk about the sporting part, even though you, the whole concept of the brain class was trying to bring together some kids who are academically gifted?
I think that what I say about it in the book is that at the time that we grew up, the model kid was the all-round kid. It wasn't the superstar athlete. It wasn't the super nerd successful student. It was the all-rounder. And it was somebody who could do all kinds of different things. I mean, and I know it was the belief of our parents that we as kids should be involved in all kinds of different activities. And the notion of the way in which post-war communities were being built. This was the time of the growth of the suburbs, new schools, new churches, new playgrounds, new rinks, new ball fields, all the rest of it. And so far as most of our parents were concerned, it was that chance to have all of these different experiences. To play baseball, as well as to do well in math and to be a scout or a guide or something like that. And that was the understanding. And that was very much how it was in I think in most of our houses, and it certainly was in ours. And the thing for me that both my brother and I figured out early on is that we basically had the freedom to do whatever it is we wanted to do, so long as our grades and marks were pretty good, at least, if not better. We lost our freedom if they weren't. And so that it was this wonderful thing. And my father was somebody who never sort of said, well, you're too young to do it, or you're too this to do it. It's like, well, let him try, find out soon enough whether he can. And so you just did stuff. And again, so long as school was fine, then you could do anything, and play every sport, be involved in any activity. And it was that notion of the all-rounder, and the notion being that you learn a lot in a classroom, but you learn a lot on the playgrounds, you learn a lot, in the band, you learn a lot in all of these other fields. And that the whole community was a learning environment. And so that's how we imagined ourselves. And again, I can remember, that Lionel Conacher, we would read about him as being named Canada's athlete of the first half century. So between 1900 and 1950, Lionel Conacher. He was a pretty good hockey player. He was a better football player. He was a lacrosse player. He was, I think, a boxer, and maybe something else. But he wasn't great in any of them. I mean, he was, there were people that were far better than he was in any of those individual sports, but he was the all-rounder, and that was the model. And it was the same in the classroom. I mean, one of the things I hadn't thought about before is how it always seemed kind of ridiculous that you'd be, in grade 9, you'd pass, 6 courses and you'd fail 1 and you'd fail the year. It's like why would you fail a year if you only fail 1 class? But what you were doing is you were failing what the goal of education was supposed to be, to educate the all-rounder. And so if you weren't able to pass all 7, you weren't an all-rounder, and so you failed. And so you had to do it again to pass all 7. And so Wayne Yatman, I mean, he's just this endearing character. And I mean, you know, think of George Costanza. And so that's Wayne. And Wayne is somebody who you just, you know, he is this compelling character that you like and you want to like and you want to like even more, and then he'll do something or he'll say something. And it's like, oh, Wayne, no, you know, don't say that, don't do that. We all feel about you a certain way and we don't want to be distracted by you having said this or the other. Well, Wayne started to run. And Wayne was a fairly scrawny kid. And distance running was not a big deal at all in Canada at that time. I mean, you know, Bruce Kidd was the first of the promising younger runners, but you know, nobody was interested in distance running. And Wayne wasn't very fast, but Wayne could keep going and keep going and keep going. And so and nobody wanted to be on the cross country team. I mean, cross country. I mean, that's the fall, that's rain, that's damp, it's awful. It's, you know, and Wayne's on the cross country team. And then he starts running, you know, track and he wins the mile. And in the end, Wayne made the Canadian Olympic team in 1976 in Montreal in the marathon. And it was so much fun to write his story and of how the first marathon he ran was in Saint-Hyacinthe, just outside of Montreal, and it was during Expo. And it was the day after he had gone to Expo, or a day or 2 days after he had gone to Expo, and he ran his first marathon. And so that was 1967, and 9 years later, he was back. And in his first marathon, I think he was something like 45 minutes slower than the winning time in Boston had been that year. So that's what he would have been up against. And in 9 years, he gained, you know, all of that time by just keeping at it, And I mean, one of the things that's the hard part of the story is he blew the Olympics, and he knows he blew the Olympics. And he had a bad day, and the week before he caught a cold, and once he caught a cold, he got so distracted by the cold that he caught that he couldn't shake that, and he had a bad day, you know, at the Olympics. And at the same time, you know, and as you were saying, he made the Olympics. He was from class 9G at Etobicoke Collegiate, one of 35. Who ended up being on the Olympic team in the marathon.
There you go. Right. We have an article in tomorrow's paper. Mike Swatsky, our sports writer, has talked to you. We also had a review in the weekend paper of your book by Gene Waltz. I'm going to read a portion of that review. The class is like an anthropology text. An insider writing about a tribe of white suburban baby boomers during an important era of Canadian history. It's contemplative, thoughtful, and revealing, probably best appreciated by other boomers or their kids. There is a wonder years component to it. It's one that I can identify with. Granted, there's obviously an age gap. I'm born in 1965, so things are a little different there. That was your experience, and I want you to talk a little bit about Gene's observation about an anthropological text, because that class, as you acknowledge, was overwhelmingly white. It's not the experience that would have been of kids in residential schools. It was not the experience of kids today, either at Etobicoke or around the corner here at Grand Park High School. And so talk a little bit about that, because it's an accurate reflection of what's happening in Etobicoke, but it's not necessarily an accurate reflection of what was happening elsewhere in the country. And I'm not trying to be unfair, but that was a very interesting class and an interesting level of opportunity that perhaps not all Canadians had, and perhaps even still today.
Yeah, I mean, that thought about that, and it's I mean that you can only write your experience, and it was an experience of very large numbers of people at that particular time, and that Etobicoke was, I mean, this was a time of the real the first real boom of the suburbs, and as I talk about in the book a little bit, I mean, the suburbs now are understood as a time of, you know, kind of this vapid wasteland of sameness and cookie cutter this and cookie cutter that, and everybody just wanting to do what everybody else did. And you know, Ozzie and Harriet, give me a break, you know that father knows best, and all of those things. But those things, like anything, they come from somewhere, and they were very much in the air as the aspiration out of World War II, and after Depression, after the Second World War. And at a time when much of the rest of the world was in sort of disarray, that Canada and the US had this huge chance to do something, to be something, and what was the something? And in a lot of ways, you know, that it became embodied in the suburbs. Here was a chance to have a place of your own, a space of your own, something new, something, you know, with, again, new schools and churches and all the rest of it. So, you know, it felt like an area of immense promise for many parts of the country. And so, as it doesn't reflect all experiences and all parts of the country, it should not be understood as what it should be understood as what it was, as well as what it wasn't. And it was a very formative time, not just for us, but again for the country itself. I mean, that was one of the parts of the book that became clear to me as I was writing it. This was not only how did we get from there to here as individuals, but how do we get from there to here as a country? And I think that and that also, that as much as it is in terms of looking back, like most history, and at least good history, is that it's really that opportunity to help one understand the present, and as a way of helping understand what the future might be. And so much of our lives became, as we became adults, became about our kids, and thinking about our kids, and thinking about their world, and what their world is, and what their world might be, and what, you know, and the fears and the hopes and things. And then at a certain age, about our grandkids, and the same thing, and wanting things to be okay. So I guess the best way I can answer it is that it was an important time. It was a time that was important for a lot of people. It is an attempt to understand that time, and to help us understand the time that we have now. I mean, that now comes from somewhere, and tomorrow will come from somewhere. And it's pretty useful to understand those things. I mean, just as you're, you know, describing in terms of all of what we're not, or all of what all of the other experiences that didn't exist. Look what happened when we didn't understand those experiences. Well, you know, we lost a lot by not knowing those other experiences. We, you know, in a Canada that is quite different than the Canada then, we would miss a lot by not knowing of the experiences of those who lived through that time, you know, in immense numbers. Okay.
goalies are not captains. The last one who was in the NHL was Bill Durnan, okay?
And that was the Montreal Canadiens in the
Right.
1940s.
That's right.
But
Yeah, actually, he was brief. Yeah,
True, that's right. That's correct. Anyways, so, but at some point in this sort of arc that is Ken Dryden, you've had success in all sorts of ways, and you're thinking, I actually could be the captain of this country. And you decide to run for the Liberal leadership after being a cabinet minister. You didn't talk about leadership opportunities through your time at Etobicoke. There may have been a role there, but you weren't, I don't think there's any references to student council, that kind of stuff. You're at Cornell. What was it that you perhaps learned, observed, took in at Etobicoke in that class, that very special brain class, that led to the point where you think, actually, I have an understanding of this nation. I want to put my name in and see if I could make it to 24 Sussex.
I mean, out of that class, I don't know what experience would have, I guess and it goes back to an earlier point that you made, or you read off about learning, is that I had a lot of good learning experiences in my life. I mean, and again, learning isn't just what you come to know, but it's what you come to feel that you might be able to learn at some point. I mean, that, faced with something that you don't know, you might give it a shot as to trying out to see whether you can know it. So I think that certainly helped in terms of dealing with new experiences and actually, I mean, I hadn't thought of it until just this moment. But one of the things, and I think I probably started learning it then in high school, maybe even a little bit before, but most vividly to myself and most clearly to myself, it was when I started with the Canadiens and came up at the end of 1971 and then was put into the playoffs in the first round against Boston, and they were the defending Stanley Cup champions, and they had totally dominated that particular season and was everybody's favorite to win the cup again. And I had played 6 games in the NHL, and suddenly it's the first game of the playoffs and in Boston Garden, and we ended up winning the series and we ended up winning the cup. And everybody's sort of saying, I'm like, how is that possible? I mean, how could you deal with a situation like that? And I never had a real answer for myself for a long time. And then what my own answer to that is that I'm not somebody who believes that I can do something when I haven't done it before, because I don't know. I've never done it before. But I'm not somebody who doesn't believe I can't. And that's really, I think, what, got me through almost every situation. I mean, anything that, and we're always dealing with something new. And so you just do it. I mean, that, you don't have a choice. You're in this position and all of a sudden you've got to find an answer for it. And you have no idea whether you can do it. And one of the things that you end up learning is that all those things that you have experienced in the past and learned in the past that you didn't even necessarily know you were learning or experiencing made you ready. And you had no idea that you were ready. And I think that's what happened to me then. It's what happened to me in terms of writing books. I had never written a book before. I hated writing in high school. I thought it was boring, and I thought I could never, that whatever it is I had in my head, and I looked down at my page afterwards, there bore no relationship one to the other, and never would. And you do it. I had no idea about being a member of Parliament, really, although I in fact did, because I had done lots of other things, in it. And the thing that, one of the things that and we all like to pigeonhole, others. And so starting in Ottawa, I mean, I was the guy with this background and, playing for the Montreal Canadiens. And I can remember when I was made a cabinet minister right away, and that didn't entirely settle well with many of the Liberal caucus in that, who had been waiting for their turn. And as if, they knew all this stuff and I didn't, and why was I getting a chance? And it was like, well, yeah, you've learned a lot in terms of being involved in politics and in Ottawa. But guess what? I've learned a lot about living the 55 years or so before I got here. I've done a lot of different things, been in a lot of different situations, had no idea what I was doing, had to find a way of learning how. And so you may know some of the ropes that I don't know, but don't think that I'm unprepared for this. And so what I felt in terms of running for the leadership after we were defeated and Paul Martin resigned, was that I thought that from family trips, from as a hockey player, one of your advantages is that you can travel everywhere in the country, and you travel in lots of different places to play games, but you get invited to go everywhere. And if your instinct is to say yes, then you can be anywhere and everywhere. And if your instinct is not just to go to the event, which means then getting in an airplane, flying there, getting picked up by a car, then back to the airport, and then going back and not experience anything, but staying an extra 2 or 3 days and wandering around and seeing a place, then you start to come to know the country. And I think at that particular time, I think I knew the country better than anybody in that Liberal caucus. And I didn't know anything about being a prime minister, but I thought that that's something that I didn't know that I couldn't do it either.
I also had a chance to cover it on Parliament Hill, so I was covering that leadership race. I'm just mindful of the time, John. I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question. So there's only one person in this room that's had the experience of drinking from the Stanley Cup, right? I'm not missing anyone out here. But the one thing that we all experienced over the last several years was COVID. And you talk about that in the book. For me, getting through COVID was writing a newsletter every single night over and over and over again. You started taking car trips, right? And you talk a little bit about that. And so my final question is, we are going where we end up. That's a line your father, I think, used to use.
No, actually, I was
just you, okay. And you talk about that as you and your wife are traveling around. Thinking to the kids at Etobicoke now, thinking to the students at Grant Park, as much as this book is hopeful, where they might be, having had to be in school with the pandemic, something that you never experienced, something that I didn't experience, something my children have, though. Where they are going, are you hopeful that they can get past that and can experience the kind of things that you and Wayne and others in your class did?
Yes, yeah, I mean, like, if you are a kid, almost, most every kid is young enough to be hopeful. And adults, I think, have no right to question or put in doubt that kind of hope. It's not right. It's not right in both ways. It's not correct and it's not right. And my guess is that if our parents were here, that they would come up with their own COVID examples. And whether it is the flu epidemic of 1918, 1919, in which my mother's father died, from the flu at that particular time, and my mother and uncle were raised by my grandmother, or the Depression, and my father leaving the farm and domain in 1929 and going into Winnipeg for a year, and that didn't work, and then finding his way to Ontario and being a salesman at a time when nobody was interested in buying anything and didn't have the capacity to buy anything, or going through a Second World War that had times that where the result was in real doubt. And not just in sort of looking back and saying, well, it was always going to turn out. That isn't always how it felt. And so, that we find, that as human beings, we find a way, some way. I mean, one of the things that all of us are focused on thinking about, and I am too, is in terms of climate change. And there is in terms of what we are doing day to day, there's not a heck of a lot that one should feel hopeful about, over the next 20, 30 years or so. That it would be going through some really bad before somehow finding a way into something that is a lot better. And yet, what's the alternative? What is the alternative to, imagining that something might be better, that can be better, that we can find a way to be, better. I mean, one of the best, learnings that I had in sports, is that there's always a way to win, and there's always a way to lose, and it's up to you to find a way of winning. And before the final buzzer goes and the rest of it, it's there. The answer is there. You may not find it in time, but it is there. And so I think, that lots of you here have kids and have grandkids, and you worry about them as you would worry about them. As and as you said, or was said in the introduction, we have 2 kids and 4 grandkids. And our 4 grandkids, 2 of them are 16, 2 of them are 13. And you worry about them, and you worry, and one of the things that was always, that as parents we always get wrong is that we look at our kids at age 15 or 16 who can't remember to do this and are hopeless at doing that, and then we look at the uncertainties in the future and like, oh my God, how can this kid who doesn't know how to tie his shoelaces is going to end up ruling the world or something else? Well, the 16-year-old becomes the 20-year-old, becomes the 30-year-old. And we look back at those kids at a certain time in our lives and we go, holy cow, how did they get so competent? How did they come to learn to do that? I remember with our daughter, she was after her second year university, and she went down to Ecuador to teach English as a second language. And she knew no Spanish whatsoever. And I went down to visit her for a couple of weeks. And the first couple of days, she was kind of deferring to me, for, certain things. Well, Dad, what should we do here? And Dad, what about there? And should we go over there? And finally, I just said, Sarah, this is your place. This is your world. You know something about it. I know something. I know nothing about it. You take the lead. I'll follow. And so, we've lived through tough moments. We will live through more tough moments, individually and collectively. But again, it is not right not to be hopeful, not correct, and not right. Thank you.
John, I'm watching the clock, and so we probably have time for some questions.
We do. We started a little late, so we can probably go for the next 10 minutes or so with questions. If anybody does have one, please just raise your hand.
Yeah, so you talked about not knowing till you try something. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of hockey? Did you always know you're going to be a good goalie, or when did it come to you where you were like, okay, I'm a good goalie, this is for real?
Yeah, no, and I think what happens, and it's like, as I made reference to in terms of that first playoff series, is that you're so in the midst of something that you don't have the luxury to say to yourself, can I do this or not? You just have no choice but to do it. And then you discover later that, actually I did it. I had no idea. I never imagined I was going to play in the NHL. never. I mean, it's easy to kind of sort of say that, and it's like, oh yeah, well, sure, but you had a deep down fantasy. No, really, no. I mean, I was a kid in Humber Valley in Etobicoke playing for Humber Valley, and the NHL was Saturday night on a TV screen. And those guys were 10 feet tall and skated 1,000 miles an hour. And I was never going to be them, ever. And then, I just kept playing. And then eventually I got drafted. And so then you're drafted. And so everybody says, well, of course you're drafted. So now you must think you're going to make it. No, no, like I'm still playing junior B hockey, or I'm playing college hockey, and nobody thinks college hockey is a route to the NHL. And so then we do really well, and I'm an All-American and all this stuff. And so, well, now you know. No, I don't know. I mean, so much didn't I know that, I mean, I had a chance after Cornell to either just go to law school, just play, or try to do both. And I ended up, trying to do both. And what both was, to come here, to play for the national team, to take my first year of law at the University of Manitoba. And I was going to, it was a 3-year plan, because law school is 3 years. And that 3-year plan was going to see me in Sapporo, Japan in 1972 for the Olympics, because that is as far as I could go, so far as I understood. And then, then I arrive, then the national team folds, I end up in Montreal. I'm supposed to play for the American League team in Montreal, 8 games a year for 2 years until I graduate. And suddenly I'm starting to do pretty well, at this training camp, and then with the American League team, and they bring me up. And even when the first year was over, and we win the Stanley Cup and all of this stuff. It's like, can I do it the next year? I mean, who's to know? I don't know where this came from. Well, where it came from might is quickly disappear as it arrived. And so I can remember, when we were asked for occupation, for our I-20s or something like that, which was like a kind of a visa that allowed you to go across the border at that time. Occupation, I wrote every year, law student. I didn't write hockey player because I didn't think that I was a hockey player. I was playing hockey, but I didn't think I was a hockey player. I mean, all of these things is you just do them. You do them and you find out whether you can do them or not. And so that's how it was, with hockey, as well.
Just a quick one, Ken. Trachek is another famous goalkeeper. Do you have any contact with him, or did you have?
Not a lot. I mean, that language is a very big barrier, as we know. And so we find ourselves in the same place at times, and neither of us is a sort of a thumbs up person, but at the same time, by a glance or a look, it would be kind of, that sort of thing. So I think there's an affinity, and I think that there's a certain closeness that we would feel that way. But in terms of it extending somewhere through conversation and doing things together, no, it hasn't been that way.
First off, welcome to Winnipeg and congratulations on a great career. So nice to see you. 51 years ago, the 72 series with Canada and Russia. And your recollection on leaving Canada to go to Russia to play with the situation that was facing you there. How were you?
I mean, it's the same as what we've been talking about, and it's the same as all of the stuff in here. I mean, it's you have these life experiences, you're put into certain positions, and you don't know what's going to come next. I mean, that was a total, and as I talk about it and all this, I mean, almost all of my life has been a surprise. Almost all of the lives of those who were my classmates has been surprises. That was another surprise. That we would find ourselves in the situation that you describe of, instead of leaving Canada ahead 4 games to none, we're leaving Canada down 2 games to 1 and 1 game tied. And then we lose the next game. And so, here we are in this situation where you have a chance to have lots of emotions, and you surely have lots of them. And the question is, what one is going to prevail? And some of the emotions are, that you feel sorry for yourself. Before you get to that, that you feel sorry for yourself, you start whining at the fans and the Canadians that have left us behind, that are booing us, that hate us, and it's us against the world kind of feeling. And then you finally get to a point where you can have all of those feelings, but there's still a game to play tonight and still a series to win. And so, get on with it, get over it, get on with it. And we didn't know how it was going to turn out. I mean, you can't know how it's going to turn out. All you can do is not know that it's going to turn out the wrong way. And you just keep at it, and you end up finding things about yourself and about others that you never knew, you never imagined. And I mean, and that's really what am I trying to do in all of this? I'm just trying to listen to people talk about their lives and what life feels like, has been like for them, what it feels like, just for you, for anybody else. And what does that say somehow in the end of all of this? You all go through it, and part of one of the hardest parts, and probably the hardest part of this book to write, was when I did finally get from there to here. I got to today, the today of writing it, right up to the present, right up to that last sentence. I wrote the sentence, I put a period afterwards. And then it's like, no, actually, I'm not at there, I'm at that there. Now, what's the next there? I've got tomorrow, happily. I didn't die when I put that final period. So now what? In it all. That's all I'm trying to do, in this.
Mr. Dryden, you have led 3 phases of your life experience: hockey star, writer after your hockey experience, and also politician. Out of each of those phases, which one was most enriching, or were they all just a different?
I mean, I never saw any of them as different. I mean, I saw them all as the same. And I think, all of them, I enjoyed wanting to do them. All of them are a test. And all of them really involve trying to figure stuff out. And I really like to try to figure stuff out. I mean, the life of a goalie is trying to figure stuff out. You're the only person on the ice that is both immersed in the action and separate from the action. And the only way you can understand the action by being separate from the action is having been immersed in the action. That's what starts to make sense when you have been immersed. Otherwise, it's just theory stuff, in it. That's what I really enjoy about writing. It's trying to figure stuff out. Why the heck is this the way it is? Why isn't it like that? How did it get to be this way? How did the country get to be this way? Why is this guy that way, this way? Why does Wayne react the way he does, and Lisa this way, and all the rest of it? And the same in politics. It's the same, why? Where are we as a country? How did we get here? What makes us us and not something else? Why are we different from, you know, from some other place? What made us that way? And because of all of those, trying to figure it out is trying to figure out, how can we do it differently? How can we do it better? What are some of the answers, you know, to all of that? And that's what I like to do. And so, you know, everybody I'll meet would ask the same kind of question that you ask of, what possibly is the connection between playing hockey, going to law school, you know, working in government, writing books, teaching, and the rest of it? None of it makes any sense. To me, it makes total sense. They are all connected. And really, and as somebody, you know, earlier today I was speaking with in terms of this book, saying that it kind of connected everything that I had written, you know, before. And in a lot of ways, that's right. But I think that in all the other books that they're very personal too. They are all involved in immersing experiences and then trying to figure them out. They're all about people and actions and understandings and misunderstandings. And they're all about the country. All of them are about the country. The game was about the country. You know, the book about the average guy, it was all about the country. You know, In School was all about the country. Becoming Canada, all about the country. They're all about, you know, they're all about the country, as well as they are about individuals, because of course the country is about individuals, you know, and how we live our lives and how we individually do and collectively. Well, I think they're all related, and I love, you know, and I hope in the future to have all kinds of chances to try to figure stuff out.
And so just before we go to the final question over here, I just wanted to put one quick thing in your head. Following this question, there'll be closing comments from our guests, and then I'll review signing procedure very quickly. We do ask you all to please remain in your seats just at the end of the event to ensure that we have time to actually get Ken to the signing table before you all join us. So thanks for that in advance.
Sir, I'd like to ask you about mental health and how back then, not too far back then, but it's changed since now. I mean, COVID exacerbated that, correct? And Saturday night, we saw Connor Hellebuck on CBC do an after interview with Scott Oak, and I was mesmerized that he actually spoke to his own mental health, having published in children's books. How, like, did you guys understand mental health then? And like the pressures on a hockey player are so enormous. I mean, Scheifele, that event, that I remember that playoff goal, how he got chastised. How do hockey players deal with mental health today? And what was it like back then and as a goalie? And then how's it different from being a cabinet minister in Paul Martin's government?
Connor Hellebuck bring us the cup.
Yeah. Well, let's see about it. I'm not sure how to begin. I mean, I think that the way for most of us doing most things until at least very recently is that we had to try to figure out stuff for ourselves. I mean, that our parents might help us figure out some things, and maybe a special teacher might, and maybe a few friends might. But most of the time we tried to figure out stuff ourselves. And sometimes what we tried to figure out was too much and too hard, and we needed help. But the help wasn't necessarily around. And just as to a great extent, it still isn't around, to an increased extent, it is. I mean, and I didn't see the interview with Connor Hellebuck. I don't know what he said, but you know, that you know, you certainly get into moments where you have no idea what you're doing and you don't know what to do next. And yeah, I mean, well, I think that, and you know, and again, all of us have been in that situation. And maybe you know, this, I don't know how much of an answer this is, but it just came to mind as you were talking about that, and it had to do with social media, and you were talking about the kind of pressures that people will feel. is that Montreal was kind of, Montreal in the 1970s was an early version of social media. That there were probably 6 daily newspapers in Montreal. There were 2 English, 4 French, and then there were some weekend papers. And then there were radio stations and TV stations in both languages. And so there were probably 3 times as many media in Montreal then as there were in Toronto at the same time, and 10 times as many as there were in American cities. And we had to find a way of sort of dealing with that. I learned sort of the hard way to not read the newspapers. And it started pretty early, like probably mid-career in Montreal, because I couldn't deal with what was written. It was too much for me, and anything that was good was too good, and anything that was bad was too bad. It was worse than I am. It was better than I am. I couldn't deal with it, and that it would be such a distraction that I couldn't get on with today. You know, even the great stuff, too distracting. You know, let alone the constructive stuff. And I haven't read newspapers, you know, about me since that time. I didn't read what was on Saturday. I won't read what's in tomorrow or any of that. And so, and I'm not on social media. I'm not on social media at all, because I would find that totally, like, I don't think anybody has thick enough skin to deal with that kind of abuse. It's too much. And so the only mechanism that I have to survive it is not to experience it. It's like I can't come up with an answer for it. I can't. It's too much. It's too hurtful. And so, but it's remarkable how you can carry on your day without reading about yourself. You know, and you can get on with your day without how others, you know, write about you, or, you know, in blurbs in newspapers. I mean, I just can't believe how that has turned and into the kinds of comments that are there. I mean, and it's just disgusting, just, you know, just dehumanizing, and so I think, at least in part, dealing with the kinds of things that I think maybe Connor Hellebuck was talking about, is just try to, you know, just live your life. Just don't put yourself in somebody else's hands, in somebody else's opinion of you. Avoid it, ignore it. And actually, don't ignore it, because you can't. Avoid it, and then you can get on with your day. And it's remarkable. I mean, if something is horrible enough that actually there's an important message in it that you should know about and that you need to change because of it, then somehow that message will get to you. It'll drift to you, but filtered many times before it gets to you. And so that it gets to you in a way where you're much more receptive to it, much more able to deal with it. But the straight, unfiltered stuff, no way, not even close, never. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Ken, for being in this place, sharing your time with us and helping us understand where you came from and perhaps where we're all going. Jimmy Francis, if you were watching, I've got 2 Mahavlich Brother cards and a Free Press subscription. And depending how long the book signing goes, I've already warned Ken, there's a chance he can be on the ice with my beer league team at 10:15 at Varsity View. Okay, so we'll see how that goes.
That's really sweet.
Anyways, thank you. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so very much to both of you and to all of you for your attention and for your questions. We will move along to the signing right now. So as mentioned, we will ask you all to remain in place for just one moment while we safely transport Ken over to the signing table. I'll let you know when you're good to come join us. I'll be wandering down the line with Post-it notes and a marker. It's not because I don't trust you to spell your name when you get to the table. It just cuts down on the spelling time and leaves more room for conversation. We do have books available at the cash desk. We do have books available at the signing table. Feel free to get a book signed before you pay for it. Please pay for the book. We're also so incredibly grateful to McClelland Stewart again for helping to make this event a reality. The book is The Class, a Memoir of a Place, a Time and Us. Your host is Paul Samyn. I'm sorry. And of course, our special guest is Ken Dryden. Please.